Thanks a million for inviting me, Liz, and Write the Docs. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about code examples. You know, I'm a documentation manager. I run a team called the SDK Code Examples team. And as Liz mentioned, we write the code examples for the SDKs for the AWS services. There's 12 SDKs, some 250 services. So obviously we're quite a small team, so we're really at the start of a mission. So just putting together this presentation gave me a good opportunity to sort of take a helicopter view of our processes and to think about stuff that I do think about regularly and trying to kind of create this team and come up with a strategy for the team. And that's kind of what I've distilled into this presentation. Just my high-level thoughts on the direction that we're taking the code examples and lessons that we've learned so far. We're not there yet in terms of creating a kind of sophisticated library, which is our end goal. We do have a library, but it's not at all comprehensive yet. But to get in that place, that's sort of what I want to talk about tonight. So I'm going to just talk about Amazon in general, then AWS in specific, and then about our customers and about our actual customers, how they access AWS, and you know, the importance of code to our customers and the importance of code examples to those customers that use code. And then I'll describe what lessons that we've learned through our from feedback from our customers and from our own processes and how we are marshalling our resources to create a big library of code examples and how we integrate them into our documentation in a discoverable way for our customers. So with that, I will move on to my next slide. Okay, so probably most people know this story. 1994, Amazon, online bookseller, whose goal was to every book available to everybody within 60 seconds. To achieve that, they created a lot of data centers, so much so that they had spare data center capacity, which they had the bright idea to leverage that spare data center capacity into an online cloud provider at the birth of cloud back in the early 2000s. So by 2006, they had it set up. They released 4 or 5 services: Amazon EC2, Amazon S3, ODS, Amazon DynamoDB. EC2 is containers, S3 is storage, and DynamoDB and RDS are the data storage, database storage. So by 2022, I've skipped quite a lot there, but by 2022, 200 services. It's the world's most comprehensive, broadly adopted cloud platform. So a little bit more information about the types of services: analytics, app development, blockchain, and so forth, security, cloud foundation, computation and networking, cloud delivery and edge services, storage, backup and continuity, databases, Internet of Things, machine learning, video and immersive. So, there's 10 or 12 services within each of those categories, and it's growing all the time. So who are our customers? So you can see Netflix, Twitch, LinkedIn, Facebook, the BBC. These all use AWS. A good example is Netflix. In 2015, Netflix came all in with AWS and gave us the opportunity to host their streaming platform. They had such a massive requirements. They had such massive requirements that AWS had to expand its data center fleet. You know, some of the other big corporations there also enable their end-to-end for their customers through AWS. So it's not just the streaming; it's also the payment portals. It's their end-to-end CRM. It's their whole cloud offering. And AWS is diversified and creating new services based on collaborations with customers and so forth. So that's sort of a high level of who uses AWS. But who uses AWS? Developers use AWS. 26.6% of software developers used AWS services last year. 9% of all connected devices ran on AWS 2019, and that's increasing at a pace all the time. So how do they use AWS? So there's a lot of different ways you can use AWS services. A lot of people are probably familiar with the AWS console, which is a GUI-based console. I'm just going to flick over to it here, so hopefully I won't have any lagging issues. So that's the AWS console there, and you can see you can access all the services. It's pretty straightforward. You want to create an S3 bucket. Buckets, create buckets.
Hey Brian, we're not seeing your other screen.
Oh, okay. Hold on. Share, beg your pardon. Let me get there now. Sorry, I didn't realize that I had to skip to a new share. So you should see it momentarily.
Yep, there it is.
Great. So this is the console. You can access all the different services here. This is S3, so I can create an S3 bucket here. I'm just going to shift this down. You know, I can create a bucket there, pretty straightforward. Give the bucket a name, create it, and I've got a storage bucket up there. So that's just, you know, all the services can be accessed in that way. All the services can be accessed through the console. There's a lot of reasons why you would do it through the console. You know, for one-off infrastructure setups, for example, you might use the console. But there is, now I'm going to switch back, and I'm going to go to new share here again. Back to my initial presentation. Sorry about this. Okay, so yeah, so you're using the console. It's a management interface through which operations teams manage AWS resources, provision new resources, and monitor the status of our AWS. Yeah.
Brian, I'm sorry to interrupt. Are you? I think maybe some people say it's crackling. Are you able to close out of AWS now that you've shown us the UI so that your connection might be a little bit better?
Sure.
Okay. Sorry to keep interrupting.
No problem. Is that any better?
I think so. Yeah. Yeah.
Great. So the other way that you can access AWS services is through code. So you can use the Cloud Development Kit, for example. You can use the CLI or PowerShell. You can use Cloud Shell, which is a hybrid. And you can also use the Amazon SDKs. So, you know, I wasn't quite sure that everybody would be familiar with these terms, so I just wanted to kind of touch on what an API is versus an SDK. API is the application programming interface, which defines how two pieces of software communicate with each other, essentially, or two databases communicate with each other. It's raw and it's language agnostic. The SDKs convert the REST APIs into the application domain or language for the users. They provide documentation, code examples, testing modules like mocking, and they also include the REST API specifically written for each individual language. So, you know, that's the Russian doll. The API appears within the SDKs. And I wanted to highlight the difference between a code example and a code sample. We provide code examples rather than samples because a code example is basically runnable. It demonstrates an exact piece of code that you would use, whereas a sample is demonstrative. It shows you how you can create code examples. It shows you maybe a prototypical pseudocode version. All our code examples that we provide are runnable for our customers, not only because they have a tutorial a requirement to them. They can also take that code example and integrate it into their code, which saves them time, which is a priority for a lot of developers. So I mentioned AWS Code Examples team. I manage this team, and it's a dedicated group of programmer writers. You can see all the languages that we do code examples for there. We have a dedicated writer for several of those, and some we have only a support writer for. So we have sort of, at the moment we're doing some expansion of the team. So we're basically doubling and then hopefully tripling in size. So a little bit more about that later on. We're hiring essentially is part of the it's part of the message. Our process is we use an agile process. So we do bi-weekly sprints. We identify a specific set of code examples that we do across all the languages that we then publish to the guides. All our code examples are open source, and that has lots of advantages. It enables us to take in third-party code contributions. It also enables users to contact us directly if there's any errors in our code. In the unlikely event there are errors in our code, they can actually point them out to us, fix them for us in some cases. And also because it's GitHub, it's where developers eat, drink, and sleep. And it enables us to set up a workflow that I'll demonstrate in a few minutes for our customers when they use our code examples. They can easily integrate them, download them, and use them straight away, straight from our user guides. I quickly wanted to show you that GitHub repo just to give you a flavor or a sense of how we do this work. So I'm going to have to switch screens again. Okay, hopefully you can still hear me. There's no crackling. It might be a reconnection issue. So you can see the repo there. Yeah, so you can see the repo now. So this is the code examples repo. This is where all our code examples are kept. You can see we have all the different languages out here. We have our agile process. We run it through GenHub. So we have our product backlog and our sprint backlogs and so forth. And we run a pretty standard agile process on a weekly basis, on a bi-weekly basis. So I'll sort of briefly show you that. So what kind of code examples do we write? There's three types of code examples that we do. We do single action code examples. So for example, S3 create bucket, that would be a single action code example. We do scenario examples, which link together multiple single action code examples. So that would be, for example, create a user and assume a role in IAM. That's strings together about 9 different single API commands and gives a real life scenario that customers can relate to and may use, teach them how to use it. And then we have cross-service examples, which link together multiple services. So different services with a real world scenario. In that case, it's a photo analyzer that enables you to upload photos to your to a database, analyze them using AWS recognition, which gives you back data about the images that you've uploaded, and you know, what kind of objects are in the images and so forth, all the various data points about the photographs that recognition is able to return. So they're the types of code examples that we do, and we base those sort of on research that we do with customers, and we prioritize them based on metrics that we get from customer usage of the SDKs. So in terms of publishing our examples, we have 4 different types of guides. We have the developer guides, we have the API reference guides, we have the SDK developer guides, we have the SDK API reference guides. You know, we recently, our team came up with a mechanism to enable us to automatically publish on a nightly basis all our code examples directly to all the relevant guides. And it's sort of revolutionized our work in the sense of it gives us a direct route to our customers. So I'm going to show you that briefly here, how that works and how that appears in the guides. Okay, so this is the S3 documentation. In here we have a user guide, which is a developer guide. We have an API reference guide. So we don't publish examples directly to the API reference guide. We publish them directly to the developer guide. So you can see here down the bottom of this page, there is a code examples node. And this is what we directly publish from this subrepo here. We directly publish on a nightly basis all our code example to an intermediary XML converter that converts all our examples into XML. And we have then set up a process to integrate them into our guide. So you can see here, we click on the code examples here. It describes the different type of code examples that we write. And you know, you can click into any of them. For example, create a bucket, and this will show you all the different examples in all the different SDKs for creating a bucket. The other types of examples, as I said earlier on, are the scenarios and the cross-service examples. So again, these are all in different languages, and the cross-service example certainly are in, some of them are only in single languages and some are in multiple languages. So when users come in here, I mentioned if a user came in wanting to get an example for create a bucket, they can copy the text from here and go straight to their clipboard, or they can go down to the bottom here where they will link directly to the GitHub repo where this example is hosted. And they will also link to the, in this case is the Python SDK. They'll link to the create bucket documentation in the Python SDK there. So that's part of the process that we've automated for providing links for users to, as I mentioned earlier on, directly get to where the example is hosted. So you can see create a bucket is there. So the user can go in and they get the Boto 3 create bucket there. So that's where they can go to use the code example that they were looking at in the guide here. So this received a lot of sort of a warm welcome from influencers on Twitter, this process. So this from Ben Kyo here. I added examples for a bunch of use cases using SDK in a variety of languages. So that was a very positive bit of feedback to get. There was sort of a negative comment or a suggestion for improvement, which we welcome. Excuse me. In that same tweet, which I'll get into in a moment. But I want to talk about the lessons that we've learned as going through our process. So essentially, there's 4 lessons that as I was reflecting on it, these were the lessons that I kind of took from what we've done so far. This idea of promoting best practice. So, you know, code examples aren't always the best way to do something with the AWS services or with any SDK. So before you provide a code example and promote a code example in your documentation, always be sure that it's the best way to go about it. Code quality is obviously hugely important. And I'll get into exactly kind of how we maintain and enforce code quality. You're better off not having an example than a broken example, because you will lose customers quicker with a broken example than you will with no example. To automate, if you can automate at all, we found it to be a game changer for us to be able to automate our publication process specifically. And to research, being able to research your users and figure out exactly what it is that they need. So, yeah, as I mentioned with this tweet, later on in that tweet, I'll share it with you here quickly. So you can see that tweet there, a very, very positive tweet. But then down below, the comments kind of point out that, well, you know, this is great. The form of the example is great, but nobody would ever use the SDK to create an IAM user and assign a role to it. And it was something that we'd overlooked. We assumed that because we're the code examples team, we're going to make code examples for these popular processes. But for infrastructure as code, nobody would use, they would use the CDK way before they would use the SDK. And so in a sense, we were misdirecting our users. So I think that's one of the lessons that you know, we've gotten from feedback from users. You can see here, all jokes aside, for real world projects, 60% I'm using CDK and 40% CloudFormation or Terraform for this process. So that illustrates the importance of ensuring that you're promoting best practice rather than trying to promote your own code examples. It's not about us, it's about customers and what they want. So code quality is the next thing I wanted to talk about quickly. You know, single source code examples. We have one place where we have S3 create bucket, and that's it. There's no other instances of it in our documentation across our SDK documentation, across our API documentation, across our individual service documentation. There's one example, and we can move that about anywhere in there. We can change it in one place on GitHub, and that change will be propagated through it. And that's really important to maintain quality and ensure that there isn't multiple versions of the same thing going about, as well as saving us time because we don't have to, do the same example again and again. We test everything, so we use unit tests or integration tests depending on the use case. So we do not publish anything that isn't unit tested or integration tested. And again, this is to ensure that we don't lose customers because they spend a lot of time on broken code and they, you know, understandably lose their patience with us. So one thing I wanted to touch on was, you know, should a technical writer write code? Amazon hires programmer writers for this purpose, and they're essentially in the tech writer family, but they're tech writer techs, so they're tech writers who have coding skills. It can take time and a lot of effort to learn code, and if you don't know code, I don't recommend trying to write code examples until you go specifically to learn code. If you are given the task of writing code examples, co-opt developers, co-opt other writers who do know code to help you to review your code, to you know, provide you with the expertise. There's always people in your company that will know the code. Sometimes it can be difficult to get developers to write the code for you, to integrate it into your publication system. But if that's the route you have to go, you're better off treating it like any area of expertise that a technical writer has to find it off an SME, than trying to fake it, because trying to fake it will just lose customers, and developers can be you know, pretty demanding customers. So finally, go open source, because as I mentioned earlier on, you're able to get third-party feedback, and that's hugely important. You can, you're also where developers eat, drink, and sleep on GitHub. So it's a very important presence to have. So you know, it's highly beneficial to do that on a lot of levels. And finally, in terms of lessons learned, automation is a big factor. If you can automate, what we've done is, you know, we've employed a lot of GitHub checks, a lot of GitHub automation integrated with our build system that enable us to automatically publish our code examples on a nightly basis into the documentation directly. And as I mentioned, it's a game changer. It prevents us having to repeatedly create code examples. It prevents us having to follow up with guide writers to publish the examples. Every SDK guide will, in the long term, have a code examples node from which they will be able to, the writers will be able to pull individual examples through an automated mechanism into their content. So it ensures that the code is written by people who know how to write code, and is written and maintained and tested by a centralized team of specialists, as opposed to being vulnerable to being changed by people who don't know how it works. Yeah, so that's kind of automation. Anything you can use to automate. You know, you can, a lot of your SDK teams, the developers might be able to automate some code, but they'll only be able to automate very simple, straightforward examples, hard examples. They won't be able to automate soft examples like the scenarios that are real life use cases, or cross-service examples that demonstrate how to chain multiple services together in a real life scenario. That's something AI hasn't quite gotten to yet in terms of automatically generating code examples. So it's an important part of us to do handwritten code examples, because developers appreciate that. They understand, you know, that we can't possibly cover every potential use case. And developers want to see patterns. They want to see how we create code, how we link services together, and then they can go and figure out from those solid real world examples how they can apply those lessons learned in their own development practices. And we found that to be hugely positive. We engage with users on Stack Overflow, on other forums, and this is kind of what a lot of users want, especially when they're initially getting to know how to use our service offerings. Yeah, and research too. So, you know, as I mentioned, Stack Overflow is one of the developer forums that we spend a lot of time in to figure out what kind of code examples we're writing. Metrics, we have AWS metrics. We record all the number of hits on our SDKs, and we factor that into our roadmap in terms of prioritizing what code examples that we're going to write. Solution architects within our company, in-house developers within our company, anybody who has interaction with customers, they can all provide valuable feedback to you as a code example writer, or somebody with an input into deciding what kind of code examples are going to get included in the documentation. The expertise will be there within your company, because you know, if people are using the APIs or the SDKs, that means people have thought about, in your company, have thought about what your users are working on, and they understand what kind of code examples that they would benefit from. Remember to cater to for different levels of users if you can. We start our cross-service code examples will run the user from soup to nuts through an entire, between setting up your credentials on your AWS services, to setting up the scaffolding resources through code, to setting up the functional resources that you need to actually run the example. And all they have to do is follow it, and they will have implemented a web app using AWS services. And from that, that's automatically improved them as a developer and made them more disposed to AWS services that they're going to come back and use again. It's a huge part of our customer base, so it's very important that we ensure that they are constantly developing and we're bringing on new customers all the time. One other thing that we do is we provide pretty sophisticated READMEs in GitHub. So when we link out from our official documentation through the GitHub link, the users are brought to other documentation, and that's where the skills of the technical writing side of our team come in. They're writing big, long, 15-page narratives about how this particular example will work. Well, it's 15 pages if we include the code, because it can be quite verbose. So as writers, which most of our team are sort of dual writers and developers, we have a lot of opportunity to write and use our writing skills. We also use a lot of code comments, and we have a policy about code comments that we want our code to be understandable. We try to minimize code comments because we want the code to speak for itself and to be written in a human readable form, because that's kind of what developers like. But we also want to cater for all levels of developers by enabling, by providing code comments to, get people started and get people to understand exactly what is happening in the code. So yeah, I mentioned earlier on that we're hiring, so I just wanted to kind of briefly touch on that. We have a couple of roles here. I will share them afterwards. I'm not sure the best way to go about sharing them, but maybe we can chat about that in a couple of minutes.
Yeah, I'll send the recording out and other links, including these links to these positions to all the attendees after this. So you're good.
Brilliant. Thanks a million. And after that, Q&A. So if you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them.
Thank you so much, Brian. That was great. To get it started, Greta asked a question. I can read it out. How do you make the decision to support a quote unquote new language? Does one person then go through and write all of the examples?
So the decision to support a new language is it's not a decision that we make, in terms of if there's an SDK there, we have been given the resources to scale to support all our SDKs. Pulse of what the projected trends are, what new languages coming out, what are the most popular services, what do customers want code examples in, and that's through research and through looking at the metrics for the number of hits in the SDKs and the API commands across, because we've got pretty good data, and we know what our customers are doing and how they're using our services. So we use that to make a best guess. And there's also executive decisions that are made that we sort of don't know why, but we have to follow them through because it's what we're here for.
One other, someone asked, how do you keep your code examples in sync with changing services? Is that what your unit tests do?
Yes, essentially, if the underlying API changes our code, and we're not there 100%, I'll be honest, we have a huge tech debt for, unit tests across stuff that was written before we implemented this. So, but if the underlying API changes, our test will fail. We should be notified in advance if there's anything that's kind of not a major version release that has changes, and then we go through and do the tests. But essentially, yeah, our best practice is to run those tests regularly, and we're working on an automated system to run those every week or so on an internal instance of AWS services with all the config files. You're literally running all those examples, and you run them in real life. So you're making sure that when customers take them and run them and follow our documentation, that they will work.
one more, maybe we can get one or two more in. Two people asked if you can expand on I think you mentioned during your presentation that you guys have certain metrics that you use to track the quality of your code examples. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Yeah, so not so much the quality of our code examples, but more where our customers are hitting on most. We have, Adobe experience. We can track number of hits on each page. We also use, even though it's very limited, the GitHub metrics. There is the last 10 days. So I've set up kind of hooks into GitHub metrics to sort of reflect over time the number of times that the top 10 services. It's very limited because GitHub don't let you see exactly what's going on because it's not really designed as a documentation tool. We also have a Redshift, an AWS Redshift database, into which there is a dedicated metrics organization in AWS, feeds in all those metrics. And then we use DataGrip, which is a JetBrains IDE, and we just use SQL calls in there to pull out whatever it is, to find out the top 10 most popular S3 calls in the last 6 months, and then we can see, do our code examples meet that? We've evolved these processes, but we've also sort of been supported by PMs internally within AWS, because they will then suggest to us better examples that are more suited to the metrics. So we're working on we're pulled very thin to kind of manage all these things, but that's why we're being given the opportunity to expand and to get PM assistance for coordinating these and making our examples more user-centric and more responsive as well. So it's a challenge, but we try to be as scientific as we can about it, while also listening to apocryphal feedback, and if that scales, then we'll use that too.
I'm going to ask one more before we close out, because it's another really interesting one. Someone asked, if there are multiple ways to achieve a goal, how do you land on the definitive way to do it? Do you find yourself negotiating the sequence and examples with PMs and engineering, for example?
The
sequence, I assume, of a code, which different calls are included in one one example.
That's a great question. So we usually create what we do. Yeah, we negotiate, and then we have our one person kind of goes ahead and does the so for a scenario example that's maybe 10 or 12 API calls in the specific service to achieve a specific goal, that might mirror a sequence of actions in the console. They would interact with the guide writers, with the service dev team, with the SDK dev team, because they all sort of are stakeholders in it. They will all have some insights. We'll also talk to the customer support developers who work on the open source repos for the actual either the SDK or the service, or both, and they will give us feedback on whether this scenario is something that customers would actually use. And it can be a challenge, because like I said, the IAM one, we sort of said, well, customers must use that. So we didn't do a huge amount of research. And it turns out, well, most customers don't use the SDK for IAC, infrastructure as code. They use it for kind of repetitive tasks that are, but not for these one-off sort of infrastructure setups, which is fair enough. So we rely on anyone who has got an intimate understanding internally of what our customers, what are some common scenarios our customers are doing. I mean, with 250 services, we can get through a lot of getting started, sort of basic level, almost CRUD operation type scenarios that would, to get users using the SDK and to understand the basics. A lot of the time we can mirror what's going on in the console, because SDK users will use it as well. So yeah, there's oftentimes we can misfire and guess that this service would be popular with SDK users, and they definitely want to do that, and we'll find out off one of those stakeholders, no, they never would. And then we have to kind of go back to the drawing board and figure out, well, what's the next service on our roadmap that we can do something for. There's there's always a need for more code examples because AWS is expanding so fast that yeah.
All right. Yes, sorry we didn't get to everybody's questions, but thanks so much, Brian, for presenting. I think everyone got a lot out of this. Just a reminder to everyone, I guess Brian did give his contact information. So if anybody asked a question and did not get it answered, hope you don't mind, Brian, but if anyone, you can probably ping him if you have a question or anything, or if you're interested in one of those jobs that he advertised. I think you should be fine to do that. I also just posted the link to our YouTube channel, so I encourage everyone to subscribe. I'm going to stitch the video together, some of the times that I paused and resumed and everything, and we'll get that vetted by Brian and then up onto our YouTube. So anyone that missed it or wants to watch it again can take a look. Yeah, again, thank you so much, Brian, and to all of our organizers. And we will see you next month. We'll talk to you guys soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, bye-bye.